Hello students. In last class we were discussing about the liberalization, privatization, globalization. That was background of the liberalization, globalization, privatization. Okay, before starting this, we were discussing about the background. Background is what was the situation of country at the time of 1980. What was the situation of country at the time of 1980? So in the time of 1980, the Indian economy adopted which one? Mixed economic system. In present also India is following mixed economic system. So under this, at the time of 1980, there was completely more restrictions on private sector, either export or import, or to fix the price, to decide what to produce, how to produce, whom to produce. These are all decisions taken by the government only, because under the mixed economic system, both we can see government and also private sector both are playing very important role, but much importance given to the government. Government only takes decision about what to produce, how to produce, whom to produce, and what price should be fixed, everything. But there was more restrictions on private sector. So in this situation, what happened? There was the expenditure was exceed its revenue, and also it was government decided to take loan from other countries, even other banks, other like public, like from financial institutions. There was less income to provide basic facilities to the people. So in this situation, the government of India decided to take loan from the financial institutions like IMF and IBRD, right? IMF and IBRD. IBRD also called as a World Bank. Also called as a World Bank. I think already you studied about this in SLC only. Okay. IMF is the International Monetary Fund. IMF is International Monetary Fund, and another one is IBRD, that is International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Okay, reconstruction and development. The government of India decided to take loan from these two financial institutions. What purpose? To manage the economic crisis or financial crisis. Financial crisis means there was no money to spend, provide basic facilities to the people, and there was no money to the production of goods and services. The government expenditure was exceeds its revenue, what it has collected revenue. More than that, the expenditure was increased, and also the government decided like what it is collecting the revenue completely less. It was less. So in this situation, and also the exports were less and imports were high. Imports were high, and also what the collected government, what the revenue collected by the government, that was also less to meet the consumption needs. So in this situation, India approached to World Bank, that was IBRD and IMF. So what purpose? To manage the which one? Economic crisis or financial crisis? To manage the economic or financial crisis. Okay. So that's why the government of India decided to approach to lay down this which one situation, to control the situation. They decided to ask loan to the which one? International loan from International Monetary Fund and International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So what purpose? To manage the economic, manage the condition of economic crisis. Manage the condition of economic crisis. So, and also the government of India received $7 billion. 7 billion. When the government of India approached to these financial institutions, the financial institutions both decided to provide loan. How much? $7 billion to manage the crisis. To manage the crisis, but they put few conditions. What were the conditions? That was the government of India should be open up of an economy. Should be open up of economy means should be interact with other countries. Should be export to other countries, should be import from other countries, and also the completely should remove the restrictions on private sector. Should be remove the restrictions on private sector. That was liberalize the economy. Should be liberalize the economy. Okay, that was the restriction. That was the condition of IMF and IBRD. Okay, so for this sake, India was decided to remove the restrictions on private sector, and also it decided to open up of an economy. Open up of an economy. Okay, so finally reducing the role of the government and to increase the role of private sector and remove the restrictions on foreign trade and remove the restrictions on private sector, India agreed to the conditions. India agreed to the conditions laid down by the World Bank and IMF on the in the time of 1991. In the time of 1991, Prime Minister of India P.V. Narasimha Rao, okay, and the time of his cabinet finance minister Manmohan Singh, okay, Prime Minister of India P.V. Narasimha Rao at the time of 1991, and Finance Minister of his cabinet Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Both are decided to introduce new economic policy. They decided to introduce new economic policy, that is NEP, at the time of 1991. This is also called as economic reforms of India. Economic reforms in India. So new economic policy. New economic policy. What purpose? To boost up the economy, to development of an economy, to develop the country, to open up of an economy. Especially, they are taken loans from the IMF and IBRD to manage the crisis, economic crisis or financial crisis. For this say, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Finance Minister at the time of 1991, and Prime Minister of India, that was P.V. Narasimha Rao. P.V. Narasimha Rao decided to introduce new economic policy that was called as economic reforms. Economic reforms at the time of July 1991. July 1991, very important date. That is July 1991. The economic reforms were introduced. Economic reforms were introduced. Through this, India was directed to liberalize and open up of the economy. India is directed to the liberalization, liberalize and open up of an economy. Liberalize means remove the restrictions on private sector. Should give the freedom to the private sector. Should give to the freedom, that is, should give the freedom to the private sector. There before, at the time of 1980, completely it was under the government sector only. Okay, there was no freedom to export, import, to produce goods and services. Everything should get permission from the government. Okay, for export, import, like foreign trade. Okay, especially through this new economic policy, the government has decided to remove the restrictions on private sector in foreign trade. That is export, import, produce goods and services, like investment, production, consumption, distribution, for everything. Decided to remove the restriction. Decided to remove the restriction. So India was directed to liberalize and open up of an economy. Open up of the economy, and the government of India decided to give more freedom to private sector. So in this situation, they were introduced both P.V. Narasimha Rao at the time of 1991. The Prime Minister of India was P.V. Narasimha Rao, and Finance Minister was Dr. Manmohan Singh. Both were decided to introduce new economic policy at the time of July 1991. July 1991. The main aim of this policy, that is create a more competitive environment. To create more competitive environment in the economy and remove the barriers. Remove the barriers for development of an economy, especially remove the restrictions on private sector. Remove the restrictions on private sector. What purpose? This policy, the main aim of this policy was create a more competitive environment in the world. To create a more competitive environment in the world from by our country, and also remove the barriers. Remove the barriers. Barriers means restriction on private sector. Okay, anyhow, in this situation, through the 1991 economic policy, the government of India introduced three weapons, we can call like three weapons or three instruments, very important, that is LPG. Especially it also there, that is modernization, liberalization, privatization, globalization. Okay, for the sake of 20 years development structure, the government of India at the time of 1991, July 1991, they will introduce new economic policy. What is that? That is LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, and also modernization. Okay, liberalization, privatization, globalization, and also modernization. But out of this, these are very important. When present now also, we are under the LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, globalization. For LPG there is another meaning, liquid petroleum gas, but here we have to discuss liberalization, privatization, globalization. Okay, everything we will discuss in this chapter. The chapter name is liberalization, privatization and globalization. Everything you have to discuss in this chapter. Here you have to discuss what is the meaning of liberalization, what is the meaning of privatization, what is the meaning of globalization. So especially it is created by the P.V. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh. Especially it is called as new economic reforms. Economic policy, new economic policy or economic reforms. Economic reforms nothing but change in the set of economic policies. Change in the set of economic policies. Okay, reforms is nothing but change in the set of economic policy, that is especially since 1991. Since 1991, at the time of 1991, the Prime Minister of India was P.V. Narasimha Rao and the Finance Minister of his cabinet, which one? Dr. Manmohan Singh. Dr. Manmohan Singh, both were decided to introduce new economic policy. New economic policy, that is economic reforms at the time of July 1991. July 1991. The main aim of the policy was to create more competitive environment. To create more competitive environment in the economy and remove the restrictions on private sector. Remove the restrictions on private sector, like as per the guidance of, or as per the conditions of IMF and IBRD. IMF and IBRD is also called as the World Bank. Okay, finally, the government of India decided to open up of an economy. Okay, that was liberalization, privatization, globalization, and decided to remove the restrictions on private sector. Remove the restrictions on private sector. Okay, in next class we will discuss one by one what is the meaning of liberalization, what are the changes in the economy through liberalization, and what was the meaning of privatization, what were the changes through the private sector, and what was the meaning of globalization. Okay, everything we will discuss one by one. We will discuss next class meaning of liberalization. Meaning of liberalization. Okay, so anyhow, this was completely background to introduce the new economic policy introduced by Dr. Manmohan Singh. Dr. Manmohan Singh, okay, at the time of 1991, July 1991. So they were introduced economic reforms. Reforms is nothing but a change in a set of economic policies. Change in a set of economic policies. Okay, new economic policy. Thank you.